And good evening, one and all, to two old guys in their 50s and 60s talking about the 70s and 80s, or the retro show, as I often like to call it.
So sweet.
Here
So,
is, as always, my buddy Al with us here, joining us
hello,
here.
folks.
And tonight, the topic is computers. Not so much computer peripherals. I'll leave that for another day. But in a couple weeks' time, whenever, a future time. But computers themselves. We're going to talk about a little brief history on computers, and hopefully some of you guys can feel free to share your. I'm going to go through it chronologically as best as I can. Again, 70s and 80s is the time period. So we won't be talking about Windows 95.
What about Windows 3 or Windows 3 or Windows 2?
Windows,
Windows 1.
we can talk about Windows because it was
Okay.
85. We cannot talk about Windows 3.1 because that was 92.
Okay. So we got to go back to Windows 2 and Windows 1.
Yeah, we'll talk. We'll reach that pinnacle and stuff. So, anyways, to begin with, folks, let's go ahead and jump back to. I'm not going to talk pre. I'll just go a couple years pre 70, which is when because it's there were most of the computers back then were adding machines, calculators, things like that, and they computed numbers to a much smaller degree. I mean, 1968 is I reached back there because I always thought the Apollo guidance computer was a very prominent computer in its time for NASA for the Apollo missions.
Yes. Very important, in fact.
But most of the stuff up until 76, 77 was basically heavy duty stuff. The Amdahl Corporation had a computer called the looked like a big Y. It had the Amdahl 470. Data General Corporation had the Nova mini computer. Again, these were these were glorified calculators, but that's what they were
for their time. They were, yes.
And by the way, the Data General Corporation was that was created by a bunch of people that left Digital Equipment Corporation, or otherwise known as DEC.
Yes, DEC.
Funny side story: my father worked for DEC and for I believe for NCR as well. I'm trying to remember back in the day. This was, this was in his youth, but it's funny how everything's all tied together. And the Kenbach one was in 71. I'm sure nobody remembers that one. The IBM Scamp. I don't know if you guys remember the IBM Scamp. Again, these are very, very expensive. They were very, very limited, made at a one at a time, 40, 50 machines produced, something like that. The Kenbach one was sold for $750 in Scientific American magazine.
Wow.
And Kenbach closed after 40 machines, And then we have a calculator, which coincidentally, I had this in this entire list of stuff of history, of the glorious history of computers. I am proud to say, yes, I was a spoiled kid at 8 years old. In 1973, my parents bought me an HP 35 handheld calculator. Those were the days of the handheld. My dad had one. He loved it. Hewlett-Packard was making incredible leaps and bounds, and this was a calculator.
What was it?
It was an HP 35. Let's put it this way. The buttons on the HP 35 are almost identical to the buttons that you have on your calculator program on your phone.
Ironically, I have, I believe, an HP 45.
That's neck and neck with it. And then Micrel released with the new 8008 microprocessor, obviously 8-bit. They sold a again, these were more industrial machines. Not too much of the public heard about any of these.
Mm-hmm.
Intel introduced the first processor back in 70, let me see, it looks like the 73.
And that was the 4004, right? The
That was the
4004.
4004. That is
Yeah.
correct. That's
Yes.
absolutely correct. I remember that one. My buddy John and I used to goof around with 4004s, 8088s, and 8008s. I mean, it was those were good times. The laser printer was also invented by Xerox.
HP?
By Xerox, actually, PARC, PARK, the Xerox PARC in exposed a copy of the machine's light sensitive drum to paper. That only way to create an image. The computer could write it with a laser instead. You know, I mean, it is fantastic. You know, and then the TV typewriter plans are published apparently, and again, this is all 73.
Yeah.
And Wang Laboratories, the Wang 2200. I mean, if you look at these old computers, if you do a search for these old computers, they're basically very, very small CRTs, big, huge. I mean, they're basically 3 or 4 times the size of the Osborne, if you guys remember the Osborne, which we'll be coming to, and you know, but they were professional computers, and they were. I mean, they were costly. They were $2,000-3,000 in 74, which those are like 10,000 in today's dollars, and then some. Then,
I want to go back to Digital Electronics Corporation, and I want to read this because I don't know if a lot of people know this. And this is, let's see, he doesn't say, Ken Olsen, who was the president, I believe, of Digital Corporation. There was no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. Ken Olsen made his statement in 1977. It now seems folly, although many people would probably have agreed with him at the time, especially those working with large mainframe computers, as Olsen and Digital Electronics Corporation worked. So the president of Digital Electronic Corporation says, "Oh no, we don't. There's no need to have home computers." But the mindset back then was everything was terminals. Everything was, you know, with big old
absolutely, and
connect serially to these CRTs or cathode ray tubes.
Even my first year working. Well, my first year working with computers was in 7th grade, but my first year working with computers in high school, which was 1980, 79, 80, they still, we didn't have any computers, and this was a very rich private school, no computers in the school. It was all that we had only for the administration, 2 terminals, 2 FIUs, UNIVAC 1108. Now, well, getting back to the chronology here, in 75, 74, 75, we have the 74, we had the Skelby 8H computer, which again, I know little of, but here's one, and it had the 8008. Here's one that probably you and I mean, I know I am, and you are probably very familiar with this. The Altair 8800. That was the 8800 chip. That's the one that most of us
own an Altair 8088.
You actually owned one?
I actually own one. Now, I have it out in the shop. It's probably all covered in dust. But yeah,
I never had the pleasure of owning one, but I had the pleasure of building one with a friend, because I wasn't interested in computers until the Apple II TRS-80 days, but which we're coming up on. So Radio Electronics shows a Mark 8 computer, and then here's my big life changer, is the 6502 is introduced. All right. Now the 6502 is just for me it was a game changer because I mean over 88. I mean obviously during that time it was 6502 versus 8088.
Yep.
I mean or yeah, it was just the 8800 series versus the 6500 series. That's what it was for us, back then, as long as I can remember. Let me see if yeah, Jim says, the Altair. I mean, those are great times, and then so we have the Xerox Park Alto is introduced shortly thereafter. We're still talking 75 here. We have the Southwest Technical Products SWTPC 6800, and then Tandem computers releases the Tandem 16. That's a huge, monstrous mainframe. And speaking of mainframes, the Cray 1. The Cray. Everybody remembers that name. Anybody in electronic. See, if there's names that we know is the Altair, the Cray, ENIAC. I mean, there are certain names that will always bring
always.
Fond memories,
Like,
and it's
like the Commodore 64 talking about the 6500 series processors.
Yeah. So here's a little exactly. Here's some a little information. It was the fastest machine of its day. The Cray 1 speed came partly from its shape, a C, which reduced the length of the wires and the time and the signals across them. It cost about $10 million and took a full year to build. And it was for defense work and stuff like that, and design and simulation of nuclear weapons and things like that. Then shortly thereafter, now we come to the 8088 days, because the 8080 and the Zilog Z80.
Yes.
And you guys will know the Z80 chip. The Z80 and the 8088 came out in 76. And that is when, of course,
did you know? Did you know that the Commodore 128, I think it was the 128, it was one of the Commodores, had both, I think it was the 128, had a Z chip in it and the 6510.
I know the Timex Sinclair had the Z80 in it, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it had both in it.
Yeah. So now we're getting to a beautiful time in my life, being an Apple fan. 1976, 77, the Apple I. The Apple I was a fantastic. You guys that don't know the history and enjoy Apple, I highly encourage you to Google some the history of the Apple I, particularly Steve Wozniak talking about it, because I mean, the memories that I share of the Apple II, and by the way, I owned, and I'll say it again, I've said it before on this show, I owned an Apple II Revision 0 board. That was one of the first boards ever made on there, because there were years of revisions, because the Apple II, which is my next computer on the list, came out in 1977, and it was sold between 77 and 1993. It was beautiful. It was, I mean, you think about a computer. I mean, it defines their whole company. You think about a computer that was still solid and with major improvements, but a computer whose operating system basically was good for 16 years. I mean, again, the PCs, I could say similar things about them as well. So, I don't want to exclude them at all, but we haven't gotten to them yet, because the DEC VAX is the next one, the 11780. That was from Digital Equipment. And then, of course, this is the next year, 1978. We have the TRS-80.
Oh, yes. The Trash 80, as some people call it.
And everybody called it the Trash 80. And I got to tell you, man, that was a wonderful computer.
Yes.
And the reason I say it was a wonderful computer is because the TRS-80 is the computer that introduced me to the personal computer. Because here's my little history in the world. Okay, so while I built electronic type computers like the Altair with a friend, it didn't interest me much because all you could do is program it to move lights in different orders. And okay, that's cute, but I could do that with electronics with logic circuits. So it wasn't really a big deal, you know. Now, when the TRS-80 was, I vividly I remember it, Miami, Florida, 87th Avenue and Coral Way. That's Westchester Shopping Mall, not the Westchester Shopping Center, the Westchester Shopping. Well, anyway, Westchester Shop, right next, a few stores away from the theater. They're long since gone from there, but there was that wonderful Radio Shack store. I was 16 or so. It was no, sorry, I was 14. And I walked in and I saw that that thing sitting on there, and the owners of the managers, which, you know, I'd been in and out of that Radio Shack store so often with all my little electronic parts, that when that computer came out with all the components, I would live in the force feed aisles. For those of you that don't know, force feed is the stuff that that had a high profit margin, but all the little components in the little, they don't really have that in Radio Shack. I mean, they have nothing like what they used to.
Little, yeah.
So before it was the bulk of the store that had that. Now that
was the fun part of the store. I can't remember the last time I've gone into a Radio Shack since they.
It was, and I'm looking to see what the comment. Let me see, catch up on a few comments. Wire wrapped card slots. Yep, Jim Bashirs is saying. And good evening, Paul. Good evening, everyone else. TRS-80 and Basic wasn't truly a game changer. So I sat there, and when I learned Basic on my own, just sitting and reading through the manual. They gave me a manual to take home, and I would sit there and I would program. I was 15 years old, and I would program different. During Christmas, I would program a little program that would, a 4-next loop that would do a Christmas tree with the setting and resetting of the blocks. There was basic, the most basic of graphics with a 40 by 80 screen, you know, but I thought it was the most wonderful thing in the world. And what's more, the praise and that I got from all those salesmen that had no idea. They liked, really, it was most of them, it was a job. Some of them were geeks and electronic geeks and stuff, but most of them, it was a job. The only reason they knew how to use their computers was because they each had a computer and was told by corporate that that's how they had to do their inventory from then on. But the TRS-80 was, in fact, for me, for the first 2 or 3 years of my life, was the Model 1 was fantastic computer. I drooled and dreamed of it and asked for it for Christmas one year, and it just so happens, and that was the 1981. It just so happens that my mom passed by then Burdines. It was a Macy's type store when they had an electronics section there. And I've mentioned this story before, and she saw this interesting computer, the TI 994. Mind you, I didn't know the Apple II existed, but the Apple II clearly came before both of these computers. The TI 994, I looked at the program. I still remember the tune. It had it didn't only have just one channel. It had 3 channels of that digitized sound. Isn't that fantastic? You remember the digitized sound?
Yep.
You know, the 8-bit sound. Well, this had 3 channels. You could actually make multiple chords, and I could play the chords by peeking and poking. Remember peek and poke?
Yes, peek and poke.
Oh, exactly. Man.
Exactly.
Those days, I used to love those days. Hours and hours and hours invested, not wasted, invested in my life in programming, because I loved
my learning. It was part of my learning.
It was fantastic. Not only was it my learning, it was my enjoyment. Well, anyway, so I saw that 2 months before Christmas. My mom said, "Hey, I saw this computer here. Take a look at it. Tell me what you think." And I instantly said, "I want that one instead," because it had color and it was
and many characters on the screen too,
and right? It had more characters. It was more advanced, and it was a 6500 processor. Well, anyway, that some now I got the computer, and they had a return policy of 6 months, something ridiculous like that, at Burdines.
By the way, it used a Z80 processor.
It was a Z80?
Yes, the TRS-80 used a Z-Log.
Oh, no, yeah, the TRS-80 did, but the first one, like I said, the TI 994, I had it was a Texas Instruments TI 9900 microprocessor. So it was
right. It was the 9900, yes.
Right, but anyway, getting back to this, so. I mean, and I'm jumping a little ahead because this was already, we're talking 1980. The TI 994 was released. I immediately jumped on it. I bought it. I owned one for 6 months. You would see me in school, in algebra class. I already knew whatever the teacher was teaching. I would sit down with graph paper, writing my basic lines, 10, 20, 30, go to, go sub. Practically books I would write about a stupid little vector cartoon program of a man blasting off, going to the moon, looking for a bathroom, not finding it, one saying no vacancy, and then he had to go to a different one, and then he said, this was my enjoyment. So summer comes around. I'd owned the computer for 4 or 5 months. Summer comes around. I met a guy called John. I forgot his last name. He was. We would spend the whole summer in West Palm Beach, on the beach, at a motel there, hotel. And the owner's son, because we knew the owners after spending so much time there. We knew the owner, so the owner's son introduced me to the Apple II that he bought. Oh, I fell in love with that. I said, "Mom, is there any way we can get this instead of?" Oh, yeah, absolutely. I could return it. She returned it, and I bought an Apple II. The Apple II, the cool thing about the Apple II for me was it could do everything the TI 994 could do, but it had 8 slots. It was expandable. I could put a voice processor on it. I could put, well, again, I'm not going to get into the peripherals because I just said I wouldn't. But getting back to, okay, so we're back on our timeline here. And the Sinclair's coming up. So
those software, those programs that I would personally sit down and type. I remember magazines like Nibble.
Yes, the magazines.
Magazine. And there was so many of them back then. And my point is there's no magazines anymore. Yeah, there's electronic magazines and stuff, but not magazines where you would take
before. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame. I mean, well, it isn't, because they wouldn't sell. I mean, because who would buy a magazine that has a basic program now? Well, actually, now you have vlogs, and if you need to program, you go online and all you got to do is type in, "I need a program for this," and then there's a Linux program already written.
Already, yeah, exactly.
But so 79 rolls around, folks, and then we have the Atari Model 400 and 800 computer come out.
Yes.
Atari Personal Computer System. And the beautiful thing about the Atari, now here's the thing. The Atari, I forgot if it was the 4 or the 800. I think it was the 800. The 800 was a short-lived computer because it had 2 cartridge slots, left and right.
A lid that would open up, a little lid that would open up.
A lid that would open up on top, and it had 2. Gaming was the left, so you could use it like a regular Atari gaming console. It would take those, but expansion was on the right, and it would have 8K
Yep.
of
Yep. On the
memory,
800 and 4K on the
maybe
400.
maybe
Yep.
16K if you upgraded it, but it had 8K and it had room for a full 64K, but you'd have to get that in in some other type of expansion, because you could buy a 16K cartridge, expandable cartridge for the right. Now again, they found that nobody was buying those cartridges for the right, so then they went to the one cartridge system. But 79, that was, and then of course we have Commodore PET.
Oh, Commodore PET. And
personal electronic transactor.
And it was a complete monitor and keyboard, the Commodore PET.
Yes.
It was kind of about, I don't know, 2 feet tall, maybe.
Yep.
I had the hots for one. My next door neighbor had one, and he wouldn't give it to me. At that time, I was in a Commodore 64s repairing them. Right. But anyway,
yeah,
keep going down Commodore PET.
Commodore PET was, I remember everybody telling me, no, you should get the Commodore PET. No, I want the Apple. You should get the Commodore PET. No, I want the, and some others. I mean, at that time, the nerds of us, which there were very few, were, I mean, we were huddled all together, but compared to now, I mean, there were very, very few nerds, and they would have fierce arguments about what's the best computer, because one didn't have the money to buy an Apple, so they bought a PET, or they bought a different computer, and then they, obviously any computer you bought was the best one. Why? Because you spent all your they were all different to a certain degree. You spent all your time investment learning your computer. So it's even like now, you spend all your time building a whole library of Mac programs, so you don't want to go PC, or learning a Mac operating system, so you don't want to go PC, or vice versa. But back then, we're talking Atari, TRS-80, PET, and we're talking late 70. Then we had the and like I said, the Apple II, and then of course coming up on the Sinclair, but not yet, because we're still in 1980. 1980, Commodore introduces the VIC-20.
The VIC-20. I also have a VIC-20 in a box still.
Too funny. And then that's also about the time, actually a little earlier, that's also about the time where Motorola introduced the 68,000 microprocessor.
That sounds like an Apple's thing, huh?
It is. Those are the first Macs had 68,000s in them. So, but also then the Sinclair ZX80 was introduced. Again, a lot happened in 1980. A lot happened. Happened. And then I was talking about my TI 994. That was, I bought it in 81. That was the year it was introduced. It was 1980. The TI 994. Now here's the thing, folks. For those of you that ever have seen a Texas Instruments TI 994, you have probably seen a TI 994A.
Yeah. A, yes.
The TI 994A was $400, I believe, and it had the big click keyboard.
Yeah, regular type of cherry keys.
Yeah. The TI 994 original was $1,299. Another reason I returned it and bought the Apple, thank God, because less than a year later, the same exact computer with more modern, with a better keyboard, turned out to be cheaper. But the TI 994 had a chiclet keyboard.
Yeah, chiclet. Yeah. I gave $645 for my TI 994 that I actually still have. And $645. It was, I went to go get a pair of shoes. It was the most expensive pair of shoes I ever bought.
Yep. And then now we get into the Commie 64, 1982. 1982, was the Commodore 64, and
Commodore 64.
it was selling for $595 with 64K of RAM, folks. Also, like the Apple II, it was discontinued in '93.
And I don't remember ever buying a Commodore 64. I think I bought used ones because I was repairing them at that time. I actually bought a Commodore 64 SX that's broken right now, but that's what I ended up buying. But I loved the Commodore 64. It was the best thing in the world at that time for me. Even though the IBM PC was actually what I lusted after.
And yes, oh, by the way, Jim was asking if the Timex Sinclair. Yes, the Timex Sinclair. I remember it. The Sinclair was $99.
Yeah, it was.
It was $99.
Which the TI 99.4 eventually dropped in price. Wait a second. I'm sorry. Yeah, the 99.4 actually dropped in price. I remember seeing them for $99 also, but they're after a while.
No, it debuted at 99. It debuted at 99 originally. Now there's different models of the 99. Sorry, wait. No,
he's talking about the Sinclair.
I'm talking about the Sinclair. Sorry,
yeah.
The Sinclair. The I've never seen a low price on the TI 99.4, but anyway, so now we're still in 1982. The Commodore 64, by the way, holds the world's record for selling. In 2006. Held the Guinness Book of World Records as the greatest selling single computer of all time, 22 million units. I mean, that's nothing compared to any brand of iPhone or most of the Samsungs now. But however, back then, now here's the thing though. To Apple's defense, if I were to defend Apple, to Apple's defense, the Apple II sold far more units. It was double the price, but it was, there was the Apple II, there was the 2E, the 2G, the 2C. So it wasn't really one computer. It was one operating system, if you will, And yeah, you could argue because really the operating system was, it went from Apple DOS, 102, 03, 05, whatever. So there were different Apple DOSes. Some, because obviously the advent of 8-bit to 16-bit, that changes. And then the advent of color, that changes. Yes. The advent of CGA to EGA to VGA to SVGA. Well, SVGA is 90s. That's not even, that doesn't count. But yeah, I mean, all these, every time there's a major, change in the bus and the actual hardware, obviously the operating system has to change. And
yeah, I remember CGA, and it was like four colors. It was trying to emulate color basically. IBM PC did that, but Commodore 64 is already giving them, I don't know. I don't remember the number of colors, but bunches of colors. Not CGA. Not
No. Yeah, that's it was one of the first EGA computers. Yeah, and so then now Franklin comes out. I'm sure everybody remembers the Franklin Ace. I don't know if you remember it or not, but in 1982, that huge hubbubaloo. I mean, we had the Franklin Ace, and we had everybody was talking about the feud, the suit between Franklin and, let's see, it was Orange Computers. There was a bunch of others that came out at that time. And the Franklin Ace was the biggest one because they basically created an Apple II clone. And it was nearly identical, and it would run the DOS operating system. But I mean, it's I'm sure I don't know if I don't know for certain, but I would expect that Woz and Jobs had different opinions, because I know Jobs would always try to proprietize the Apple, whereas Woz was always about sharing the technology and advancing the the technology, which is why he's always been my favorite. But if you were to if you can even compare the two, which you can't. But anyway, going on.
Jim is talking about Leisure Suit Larry and CGA. Yes.
Oh man, yep. And Mitchell says the VIC 20 was. She remembers the VIC 20 for $199. Yeah.
It actually debuted at $299, and the VIC 20 only had. I'm trying to remember the amount of memory. It was like tiny, compared to Commodore 64. I think it was 16K of memory versus 64K of memory, but it came out in 85. Oh, I'm sorry, it was discontinued in 85. Of course, the Commodore 64 was booming then.
So then we have let's see. This was the Apple II clones were in 82. Sun Microsystems was founded about then, and they the Sun workstations. Xerox they were a player, but they were a player mostly in the industrial sectors and stuff like that. But IBM came out with the PC.
Yep.
The personal computer.
Exactly.
The IBM PC, when that happened, as many computers as Apple II would sell between 77 and 80, really the IBM PC is what pretty much.
Think about this.
Just like in 2007, when Apple says, "Hey, I got a new thing. It's called the iPod." Yes, it was revolutionary, but Apple was a huge name. And if anybody if Coca-Cola were to come out and say, "Hey, we're doing this," they've got such a large megaphone that if their product lives up to the name, they'll kill it. And that's exactly what happened with IBM. IBM was the leader in the industry back then.
It was the leader in the mainframe market.
The mainframe market.
That's IBM's bread and butter. That was IBM.
And then bottom line is it was an 8088 processor, 4.77 megahertz.
Dig this, megahertz, not
megahertz.
Megahertz. Yeah, not gigahertz.
It was crazy. But with that one, I mean, that was the beginning of them tearing the market apart.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't just the IBM PC. It was a combination of, and I'm not going to get into the software too much, but for those of you that do remember, it was the IBM PC combined with Microsoft selling the operating system, combined with IBM didn't just say, "We're making a PC and we're the only ones that can run DOS." No, IBM said, "We're making the PC," and then the next person came out and made a PC clone, and the next person made a PC clone, and you didn't have to buy a quality IBM product if you didn't want to, because one of these others will run the DOS just exactly the same. Whereas with Apple, they would sue Franklin and Orange and anybody else because it is in their, EULA. It's in their end user license agreement, and in their, they got their copyright, they got their patents, and they didn't want to let go of any of their stuff because, they did for a while, but the problem was then all of these companies. Here's the thing, and I understand both sides of the coin. Here's the thing with Apple: if you control the operating system and control the hardware, you're not going to.
They do.
On the one hand, and to this day they do. You do not have any issues, and if you do have any issues, it's all your fault. You can't blame anybody else.
Nope.
However, if you don't control one or the other, let's say somebody makes a perfect example. There's so many Hackintoshes on the market. I've made a couple Hackintoshes since I have a copy of since I own numerous Macintoshes. I have a copy of pretty much every OS that Mac's ever made. So I'll load it into my Hackintosh, you know, as a test because it's illegal, if you want to put it that way. But load it into my Hackintosh, and I'll tell you what, you're going to have problems. You're going to have problems because it's not specifically gear. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of them that will run real nicely and real smoothly and have very, very few problems if you build it right and you buy. But for that much money, you might as well buy a Mac.
Exactly.
Exactly. But I mean, it's But on the other hand, like I said, on the other hand, you got the PC industry, which, see, if Apple did what PC did, then you can't say that Apple will be a market leader in that sense. They'll have. I mean, look what happened to IBM. IBM in the microcomputer market, they're nowhere near king. I mean, Dell, Acer, all these people, all the motherboards are interchangeable. I mean,
it's ironic. It's ironic that Apple was able to get away with the proprietary everything, where when IBM tried to go proprietary on its hardware, it pretty much failed. The IBM computers that were coming out after the PC,
well, there's a major difference. The major difference is part of the original Mac's operating system. Well, and even some of the PC. I mean the old Apple IIs. The ROM has the instruction set. The ROM is an Apple chip. You cannot, unless you duplicate that hardware, unless you copy it, you cannot make a duplicate.
Right.
You can't reverse engineer it. It's an instruction set created by Apple. So, I mean, yeah, you could copy it. You could easily read it. You can copy it, but you can't
market it.
You can't market it.
Yep.
There's different ways to market a computer right now. Because of our advanced technology, we can create with a Raspberry Pi, as you guys have seen, we can emulate every game from the 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, even the early 2000s. I can emulate them all on this one thing. And yet still, the ROMs themselves, while a lot of people, deal with them illegally, the ROMs themselves, many of those ROMs, not all, but many of those ROMs are owned still by Atari or Nimco or Williams or whoever. A lot of those are Sega or Sony or Genesis. They're owned by them. So the actual game, if you own the ROM, you can legally play the game on anything. But if you don't, you can't. And so now, obviously,
and it's not like you can walk down the street and buy one now. I guess you could get it on eBay or something like that.
You can get 1 million. Now, here's the thing, and here's one thing. The difference is this. Right now, you can go on eBay and you can get a Raspberry Pi and you can pay, I believe it's $60 or something like that to get a chip that has all the games. I mean, we're talking 12,000 games. I will tell you right now, that is completely illegal. Well, mostly illegal. As far as my understanding, I could be wrong. But if you do that, and I'm not advocating that you do that either. So, just be aware. It's to your own, But the reason nobody pursues that is because what are they going to lose? These are game companies selling Sonic the Hedgehog, for instance, or Pac-Man. Okay. How much money are they going to lose when nobody's making those video games anymore? The only people buying these things are people that enjoy the nostalgia and want to have something in their house. And they'll probably never would have bought the game in the first place I mean, it's a $2,000 game, a console, and there's not that many left. So, point is, it's also a matter of how much can you lose. They don't stand anything to lose by a bunch of people copying these things and selling them and pirating them on eBay. But whereas Apple stood to lose millions if somebody's selling a computer for $600 that they're selling for $1,200, and it does the same exact thing and runs the same exact program. Now, here's the thing. The Franklin Ace, they came to an agreement, and so did a few others. They sold them with Apple's blessing for a period of, I don't remember how much it was. I got to look at the in and out, my CRS. I can't remember anything, but there was a time where it was completely legal for them to copy it for them to sell it because they were licensed by Apple. They had the licensing, but the licensing was for a limited time. As soon as Apple pulled their license, they weren't allowed to sell those anymore. Right. Then they became in great demand, because it's still legal to own one. It's not, But anyway, moving on. 1983 was it was kind of interesting because that was the year the Osborne 1 was introduced. That was the first, yes, folks, the first portable computer. I love that. I love saying that about the Osborne 1. Well, the first, truly, it was $1,795. It was the first mass-produced portable computer, weighing a very slimming 24 pounds, because it had a CRT in the thing. It had 2 or 4 drives. It really had, no, I'm sorry, it had 2 drives, and if I'm not mistaken, it had 2 slots to store a bunch of, spare drives and stuff like that. And had a keyboard, had a number pad, and a little tiny screen in the middle and stuff. And the productivity software was really attractive because the software alone was $1,500. So the fact that it was $1,795, but I'll tell you. And then that was also the year that the Lisa came out. Man, I'll tell you, I was Apple crazy. I was nuts about Apple, and I was we were relatively well off back then, and still, never in a million years would I buy a Lisa. I think it was going for $12,000 or something ridiculous like that, $10,000. It was fantastic. I thought it was the most innovative. The Lisa was the first GUI computer. Well, the first commercially produced GUI computer. Okay. That was, people say, oh, Windows this, Windows that, talk about Windows all you want, but it was the Lisa in 1983. And yes, I will say that the Lisa's GUI system was based on, was it OS2? Or I don't remember what it was. It was, there was another system. It was, well,
it was.
I forgot who, because there was a lot of accusations about them stealing the system from
Palo Alto Research GUI. Okay, that they used then, but
it was the people that got fired from what. See, that's the problem when you have a bunch of engineers fired from one place, or rather, that leave one place and they join another, because. Here's a perfect example. In the history of computers, Wozniak tried to basically sell his design to HP. He worked for HP. They were not interested. HP could have been Apple. Not interested. Why? Because that's not what they do, and they didn't see a future in it, yada, 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 yada. So what did he do? He took a bunch of surplus parts. I'm paraphrasing. You have to actually look at, Wozniak's documentaries and his life to truly know, to know the real. But the bottom line is, he put together his own computer on his own because it's all a thing of mother necessity. And then if I want to build some look another recent example, very recent example, this the company that made the doorbell, what's the Ring doorbell? I forgot what they were called, a door something before, whatever. They went up to Shark Tank and they asked for a certain amount of money. And all 5 members of Shark Tank, I mean, they do this every now and then. You can't foretell anything. And yeah, they wanted a lot of money. So were I in their position, I would probably do the same thing and say, don't be ridiculous. But they had the foresight to do this. And they went on, I don't know if it was Kickstarter or what. And then, that company now is, they've sold millions of those things, and why? Because it's something that they wanted for themselves. There's a lot of these products out there that not to get too sidetracked, basically, Wozniak at the time, and I could see it because 5 or 10 years after he made it, and I'm looking at his stuff, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. When I first came across it, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world.
But that was their intent. They wanted the hobbyists to be able to have these computers. In fact, what they did is they made, I can't remember the number, but it was like 100 motherboards.
500.
And they went to a distributor. I can't remember exactly the distributor or what, but they said, okay, we got these 100 motherboards. Well, what about the rest of the computer? Well, no. This is for a hobbyist. This is...
Yeah, that's the Apple One. They made 500.
They were paying money on mainframe time that they could basically do this.
By the way, oh, see you later, Jim. Sorry.
Bye-bye, Jim.
Now, for those of you who enjoy electronics and you enjoy putting things together and have a bit of electronics and have a lot of free time, they do sell the Apple One motherboard and, in fact, an Apple II motherboard. A not the actual Apple II motherboard, although you could probably buy them, but they'll cost more money. But there's companies out there that sell an Apple One kit and an Apple II kit for you to, with all the chips, for you to completely put together yourself. Because most of those chips are, they're old chips, but it's fun to do. You want to build a retro Apple One? Go right ahead. You want to build a retro Apple II? There's 2 or 3 different makers out there that do that. I believe you may have to actually get an actual Apple ROM because they can't sell that, and it's basically 2 chips that they can't sell or whatever, and you have to get an EEPROM programmer. But then again, there's others that sell you a programmed Apple ROM. I don't even know if Apple even enforces that anymore because they don't care. They're not going to lose. What are they going to lose? $10, $20 on? No one's going to buy, and they don't make the Apple II anymore, and nobody's going to. And they're not losing any money on it. And nobody's going to forego buying a Mac, one of these latest and greatest Macs, because they want an Apple II instead. That's just crazy talk. But as far as nostalgia, you can do it. You can build one yourself. So now we get to 1984. I'll finish off quick because we're near the end of the hour here, and we're into the Macintosh, and this is where I started. I had
right.
What's that?
What people make fish tanks out of, right?
People make fish tanks out of some people, idiots, because these things are worth anywhere between $400,000 and $4,000 for an old Mac. Look,
I have an old Macintosh, a couple of them, I believe, but I don't remember what they are. I'm going to have to.
Well, let me know because I might be interested in buying one off you.
I'm going to have to clean up my stuff.
I'd love to, and I was thinking of buying an old one because they're easy to fix nowadays, and now with all that, I mean, they've got sites out there that could show you exactly how to diagnose the motherboard and where to get a mother. I mean, not a motherboard. The motherboard's the one that's a tough one to get, but uh, if the CRT doesn't work, you can buy a new tube for it. If the power supply doesn't work, you can buy a replacement power supply. Same thing goes for the Apple II. But anyway, so 84 Apple, the compact also introduced the compact portable, which again, I mean, we're talking about a 20 pound piece of, it was a big machine. The Apple Mac came out in 1984. And that was the famous George Orwell's 1984 commercial that everybody talks about with the woman running and throwing a big sledgehammer into the screen while a bunch of automatons, so everybody's going, don't be like everybody else, because PC at that time owned the market.
Yep.
How much did they own the market? Well, guess what? I had an Apple II, and my Apple II, I connected it to my Epson printer, and I was doing everything. Back then I would back then I was really into computers, and I was building PCs while I was on my Apple II, doing games or whatever, and I was doing a lot of spreadsheets on the Apple II. Well, guess what? My printer was extremely slow. Why? Because printers at that time, they relied on the speed of the computer. It doesn't matter how fast your printer was, your computer was pumping out, it was serial. So it was however fast the computer printed that, obviously if your printer printed 300 DPI, 300 dots per inch, remember the old dot matrix printers?
And it dependent on the baud rate
dependent on the baud rate of your serial connection and stuff, and it was pretty decent. But I ended up buying a PC because it was cheaper than a Mac, and for years, for a few years, I owned a PC. Then I went in 1986 and I bought my Mac Plus, because at that time, because I researched and I knew my electronics, and that 128K, the reason they sold that Mac was because, get this, the Lisa didn't sell well, but everybody kept on buying the Macs, which was supposed to be a terminal for the Lisa. But the Mac was a full computer in and of itself, except it only had 128K. Well, guess what? The Mac Plus came out 2 years later in 86. It had 1 meg. Oh, my God. That thing was just like, Now, Apple may not consider it that big of a hit compared to the Apple II or compared to the iPhone, but I'm telling you, that Mac that Mac Plus was the end all be all for me, And then the PC Junior in 85. That's when schools, basically it was back in the late 80s. Yep. It was, does your school have a bunch of PC Juniors or does it have a bunch of Apple IIs or Apple IIgs? Because every school had one or the other. Then, of course, the Amiga 1000. You remember the Amiga? You remember the Amiga bouncing ball?
Yes.
Oh, my God.
The Amiga was a really, really nice computer for
the
Mac.
Amiga came out with a 68,000 processor about the same time that the Mac came out with their and that was just a massive, compact. Had
really had going back then. They really did, and I don't remember exactly why they dropped the ball. No pun intended. With the Amiga ball, but I don't know what ended up happening. Whether it was the PC market that blew it away, or was it mismanagement, or what? But they had a great market share.
They had a decent market share.
It was the competition.
But the thing is that the Mac, by that time, the Mac came out with the color back, the SE. And as soon as you could hook up a Mac to a color program, then the Mac ran circles hardware-wise around the Amiga. And it was fantastic, the Amiga at the time, but it had the 68,000 processor, which the Mac had. The only difference is two differences. One, Mac at that time, I know because I lived the 68,000 life, Mac at that time, I remember vividly, had much more. It was like the difference between Mac and PCs. PC had many more programs.
Yeah.
Well, so why would you buy a Mac? Well, Mac had better technology. Well, the same thing happened to a lesser degree with Amiga. Amiga at the time had color technology it had multiple sounds, and it was music composition, and 3D rendering was fantastic. The Mac would have had that if they were color, but here's the thing. It only took them a year to catch up, or less than a year, the Mac. So as soon as they came out with their color, so while they were gaining market share, the Mac had already, and the PC even more, had the market in software. The Mac, everything that the PC sold, the Mac just had less of them. But like, oh, you need a word processor? Well, the PC's got 20 of them. Well, the Mac's only got 7 of them. Right. You know, I mean, so that's kind of how it was for quite a while, you know.
And by the way, going back to the Commodore itself, the reason it went out of business is because they did not have a coherent business plan.
Yeah.
And when Jack Tramiel left, none of them had any knowledge of the computer business, and it went.
And that's another big problem. And there's a big, huge problem in the computer world always, because you have the nerds. Well, it all goes. Bring it back to Wozniak and Jobs.
And the same thing almost happened to Apple. Almost.
Exactly. If you didn't have both of them, Apple never would have and Wozniak and Jobs will be the first to admit that it was what's his face? I forgot the third one. I always forget his name. But the third original one was the one who taught Steve Jobs pretty much. Steve soaked it all up, and he was an extremely intelligent man who basically learned the whole business of business. And Jobs was always the engineer, and happy of that fact. Look, I've said this before. I've run a few companies myself, and I have
Ronald Wayne. Is that who you're talking
about? No. It was after that. Ronald Wayne was more of an artist and stuff. It was Jeff something. Well, anyway, what I'm getting at is I'd run a couple of computers. I mean, a few companies myself, and run one now. And I'll tell you this, I am nowhere near the level of Jobs. You got to be a certain. But there's a certain level of, I don't want to say jerk, because, you know, God rest his soul. I admire the man very much, but you got to be a certain amount of jerkiness to be in a high level business managerial position. Most, I'm generalizing, you know, there's people like Jimmy Jimmy Buffett, Warren Buffett, and people like, you know, Elon Musk, who appear to be non-jerks in a very good position, and philanthropists and stuff, but I don't know for certain. But then there's, on the other end of the spectrum, there's the people who want to do stuff, want to build stuff, and couldn't care less about the operation. You have to have the operation to have the money to build. You have to have the knowledge. You have to have the knowledge, the drive, and the design for the product to succeed.
Is that Steve Jobs or Steve Wozniak that you're referring to?
Well, both. Wozniak was the engineer.
Exactly.
A lot of people credit Jobs for a lot of creativity. He had a lot of creativity. Yes.
And he was the jerk. He was the jerk.
and he was the jerk. Wozniak was basically,
and I love Steve Jobs, by the way.
Yeah. And Wozniak is and always will be the engineer. I don't want to say visionary, because I mean he is to a certain degree a visionary. He is a practical man that when he wants to do something, I'm sure he can always come up with a way to do it. I mean, well, you know, certainly in his youth, he's not the type of person that says this can't be done. He will figure out a way to, as many of us like you and I, you know, hey, we need something done. We need a, mother necessity. It's our driving force, But moving on, because we're pretty much over the hour already. But we got the PS2 machines. And again, we're still in now we're 1987 because now
PS2 1987. What I remember about PS2 was the proprietary architecture that they used in the micro-channel architecture that IBM used.
Yep.
And I think that's what made them fail. They were okay, but
no, they failed before. It was a rising response. The PS2 was basically a last ditch effort because they were losing the PC market because everybody copied the original PC.
Exactly. I think they were trying to emulate Apple in their proprietary design, but it just didn't work.
Now we're getting into, now we're getting into but 87, that's pretty much when, although 84 is when Apple was with the GUI, 87 is already, 85 really is Windows. Windows came out, a basic Windows, aliases it was all aliases. So you throw something away in the trash. If you delete the trash, it's just a representation. If you delete something in the trash, you're deleting an icon. You're not deleting the actual program, And the sad part about a lot of those, a lot of the way they designed that originally, the original design is that tons and tons and tons of programs were not represented by icons, yet they were part of the program. Whereas with the Mac, everything is in like a package, and it's in one icon, and the icon is that you trash that, you trash everything. Obviously there are always system files and things like that. But anyway, and then in '88, Steve founded the Next Cube, which was a complete bust, but it was more than anything else. It was a bluff. I mean, if it was basically, it was acquired by Apple in '96, and that's when Jobs came back to Apple, and that's when Apple, started basically. I mean, this man, when he was. I don't know if "let go" is the exact word. Driven out.
Who?
Jobs. When in the time that he wasn't with Apple, Apple's market share, they dropped drastically.
Plummeted. Yes.
They here's the funny part. Those were the years. It's a coincidence. Maybe it's a coincidence, but when Jobs was not with Apple, I switched to PC and I was buying PCs. And I was making PCs and I was pushing PCs. When Jobs came back to Apple, and again, not because he came back, but it just so happens that a year or two after he came back, I was all Mac. I was all back to Mac. I mean, that's when I think it was the 2SI and things like that. I mean, that's what, anyway. So then, we have the Laser 128 Apple II clone. We have, again, late 80s Mac portables. And then we're already into the 90s now. And then at that point, we're out of our little area in the woods. But it's so funny because we've reached 1989, 1990, and the technology is... It's so funny because we haven't even seen or have we? Let me see if what was the last? Was it 286? Hang on, let me see the x86, 386. Okay, the 386 was in 87.
Yeah, PC, XT, AT.
Yeah.
Which was a 286.
Yeah, I'm trying to see where we left in 89.
And then the 386 was kind of a clone
Yeah.
And then the 486
Okay.
was, and the
1989. Get this, folks. 1989. The 486, the 80486 from Intel. Oh, and obviously at about the time of the 486, if you guys remember, their AMD had their chipset. Cyrix had a chipset.
The
And
5x86.
Yeah,
but
they were all up before 1990. Before 1990, it was all 486s.
Yeah. I still have a 5x86 that I'm going to dig out of storage one of these days.
Oh, I got a few of those old chips somewhere around there, and a few of those. The computers. Yeah. But anyway, you know, so the 90s gave advent to the Power PC and the 486 and 5. It was still 386. No, sorry, 486 was the first. Think about this: the 386, the 486 in 1989 was whopping clock rate of 33 megahertz. 33 megahertz, folks. Yeah. Right now, the computer that I'm running is running. Let me see. System report. Clock speed of. Give me a second. Hardware.
And by the way, it's not megahertz that your computer is running. It's gigahertz.
Gigahertz. Yeah. Let's see. Vendor chipset. It's the M1, so I'm unfamiliar with the speed yet.
I would say 3 gigahertz.
I believe so. Let me see. Okay. This will be the last thing I do is speed of the Apple M1. 3.2. 3.2 is the max clock speed. Now here's the funny thing about the M1, folks, and I'll state this for the record. I bought this M1. And the Mac Mini M1 runs circles. I have a Mac iMac 27-inch 3.7 gigahertz 16 core processor, and with a I forgot what, some ridiculous GPU. This one runs 10 times faster. 10 times. And rendering, and what counts for me is rendering a YouTube video. 10 times faster. It takes me an hour to render another video. It takes me five minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely phenomenal. I mean, when you hear reports, and you don't hear it because you're in the PC world, but when you hear reports about how ridiculously, it's like I know that Apple's stock is eventually going to jump if they focus on the M1 and these ARM chips, because this new architecture that they have, it's like that much of a level above. It's not like before. I mean, look, I've been following Mac for a while, and for a while it's like, okay, incremental. Okay, it's a little faster. Okay, it's the i3 to the i5. Okay, it's faster. The i5 to the i7. Okay, it's faster. The i7 to the i9. Okay, it's faster. The Intel chips. All of a sudden, the i9 to the M1, it's like that much of a difference. It is night and day. And guess what? $700
for which?
For the Mac Mini.
For the Mini, yeah.
$699, I believe. I think $699 or $799. But Mac Mini, and whereas I had this computer that I was running was 32 gig. The computer I'm running now, 8 RAM.
Mm.
You know, I wish I had enough money for to have bought, because you can't upgrade these. Everything, the RAM, the CPU, the GPU, all of it's on the chip, which is another reason why it runs so fast.
Yeah, close to home.
Yeah, I mean everything. I wish I would have broken it down and bought the 16 gig instead of the. But my next one, see, I'm waiting now. I'm waiting. I'm not going to invest anything because there's no need for me to. It's super fast. But I'll tell you right now, if they have it for about the same price, the next level, the M1X or M2, whatever they're going to put out there, getting it right away.
That's computer advice from Hobby.
Hey,
so you heard it here, folks.
If you have a Mac and you can sell it for anything above $500, and most Macs you can, most recent Macs, sell it, spend the extra $200-300, buy an M1, you're going to be golden for the next 7 or 8 years. You know, because computers, you know, every 3 years you buy a new one, or not, unless if you own a Mac every 5 or 10 years. But anyway, folks. Yes. And then Andrew Haig was saying earlier, I meant to comment on it, is he said Apple computers were rare in England. The Amiga was extremely popular, you know. And so that's and Frankie with Oregon Trail. Next week, folks. Next week is going to be a good one because next week at 10 o'clock, we are going to be discussing 9 Central. We're going to be discussing all of the Easter eggs that I could possibly find, and there's a lot of them. There's enough for more than an hour show in the movie Ready Player One. Ready Player One was a fantastic.
But isn't that a movie of what 2018?
Yeah,
but it's not a movie that we're going to be looking at so much as
actually I believe it's 2045 or 2060. It's a movie.
No.
It's a movie
when it came out.
Oh, when it came out was 18, something like that. Yeah. And here's the thing. Movie came out obviously in the 2000 teens.
But it's the content that we're going to be looking at.
The content is all about the 80s.
Yes. It made me reminisce so much.
The movie and the book is about all about the 80s. Yes. Steven Spielberg, as he always does. It's so funny. He has outdone himself. How can you outdo yourself when all you ever do is outdo yourself?
You outdo yourself.
I want you all to know something. You know, I admire the man incredibly. I mean, I wish one day I could meet him, but by that time, he and I will probably be too old to get together. And not that his time is so valuable, not that he want to meet me anyway, but. Hey, a Zoom call? I wouldn't mind that either. But Steven Spielberg has been my one of my idols for a long time, and apparently it's so funny because I mean, like, I mentioned Steve Wozniak, and Steve Wozniak, I mean, he's up here. He's for me
people with Steve names, man.
I'm telling you, for me, Steve Wozniak is number one as far as fan. I'm a fan of him. I admire and respect the man for what he has accomplished, for what he does, for what he represents, for so many different things. To me, he is my number one celebrity, personal celebrity. Steven Spielberg, probably close to number 2, if not number 2. And it's kind of funny because in my yearbook, and I'll see if I can pull that one out one of these days. But in my yearbook, and this is going to be so funny. I wonder, it's too late. But if not, I've got it up there. I'll snap a picture of it. You know how they ask you to put in your favorite this, your favorite that, and the person you admire and all that. You know, it's just for your senior picture. For your senior picture, they ask you to put down a bunch of information. And so you can just look back on it. I put down, you're going to love this, Steven, and I put down the right name. They wrote the wrong one. Steven Spielbert. They actually wrote his name with a T. This, I feel so sorry, and this is kind of a, I'm going off on a tangent, but this is a tangent for the night. My my editors in chief, and I'm sorry to say that I was part of the nerd squad, if you will. I was part of all the squads, but I was part of the nerd squad. These editors in chief, I don't know what they did. I think they were fans of in the English department, and so the people, the teachers, the academia in charge hired them instead of qualified nerds. Not myself, but there were others of us who should have been chosen to be editors, but the editors in chief, because there were two that year, they put a picture, our, and I'll show it to you next week. Remind me to show it to you. Our thing was a journey or something. I forgot what our motto. Oh, Odyssey. Odyssey was our theme. Okay. We had the Star Trek Enterprise on the inside and outside back covers of our yearbook. Yeah. And guess what? It was upside down.
Of course. They didn't know.
Frickin' they put the picture. They didn't know. Herf Jones didn't know. And Herf Jones was the one at the time who was the publisher. My God. Yeah. Well, anyways, I was a little upset about that. But what I was more upset about was all my typing, and I typed it in perfectly. I typed in Steven Spielberg. He was a famous producer, even director, even back then.
Steven Spielberg.
Steven Spielberg. What did I say?
No, you said it right. You said it right. Yes.
I typed in Steven Spielberg, and they put Steven Spielberg with a T. Oh, frustrating. Well, anyways.
Yeah. All right.
So Steven Spielberg, if you ever see this and ever feel like calling me, by all means, or if you ever feel like being on the show, hey, you got an open invitation. But anyways, so I'll tell you, and same definitely the same goes for Steve Wozniak. So again, thank you for watching our little friendly show of two old guys,
guys
in their 50s and 60s, talking about the 70s,
reminiscing
about the 70s and 80s. So we will see you here again next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.
Live long and prosper.
Peace and long life, folks.